This weekend at the box office, Glass retains number one for the second weekend in a row. The Kid Who Would Be King looks a bit more like a pauper, and no one's yelling Serenity now as Serenity bombs at the box office. All this and more on this episode of The Weekend Take.
You're listening to The Weekend Take, and now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer, and with me this week is director, screenwriter, and owner of Kaleidosite Films, Kevin Martin. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I'm kind of in the post-Academy Award nomination glow as I'm looking around and seeing some of the films that we've talked about on the show previously, picking up a lot of nominations.
I want to say there were a lot of surprises, but I felt like there were some that I kind of felt coming, and there were more snubs that I was more surprised by than anything, I think.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get into that because I've got a bone to pick with the Academy on a few categories and a few of those snubs. But for those of you new to the show, what The Weekend Take is, it's a weekly podcast that breaks down the weekend box office results, but looks beyond the numbers at the current talking points, trends, and topics in the film industry. And as we do with every show, we're going to start with the films that have left the top 10, of which we have 3 such films. The first of which is Mary Poppins Returns from Buena Vista and Disney, taking in $3.1 million, a 40.3% drop from last week, losing 825 screens, bringing its total down to 1,985 for a per-screen average of just under $1,600 and a cume of just over $165 million. The second of the films that's leaving the top 10 is Bumblebee, dropping from number 9 to number 12 from Paramount. Bumblebee took in $2.9 million, a 38.5% drop, losing 603 screens, bringing its total down to 2,108 for a per-screen average of just under $1,400 per screen and a cume of $121.3 million. The last of the 3 entries leaving the top 10 this week was On the Basis of Sex from Focus Features. That film dropped from number 10 down to number 15, taking in just over $2 million, a 45.9% drop from last week. It lost roughly 1/3 of its screens, losing 685 screens, bringing its screen count down to 1,272, per screen average of just over $1,600 per screen, and a cume of $21 million in its 5th week of release. So Kevin, looking at the 3 films that left the top 10, are you surprised at this point to see any of them leave?
Well, I mean, honestly, no. I mean, Bumblebee stayed a lot longer than I anticipated. Mary Poppins, I saw the movie. I enjoyed it. I think I don't know if Mary Poppins can exist in today's day and age. So for the way that the movie did in the beginning was great. But I mean, I think the budget was like 130. There was never in my mind that I thought that they were going to get to like 160, 65. So once they hit that point where they made their budget back, I knew that was like, okay, these are all the people in that age group. And before that, you know, the boomers and the older millennials and stuff like that would rush to see this. And then after that, it would be over. So I wasn't really surprised that it dropped off as it did. Bumblebee was a lot better than I anticipated. I would venture to say Bumblebee was the best of the Transformer movies. But at the same time, I think since the Transformer movies have been such trash, the fact that it stayed, I think it's been a long time since we've seen a really good Transformer movie. With that said, I think the stank of those terrible Transformer movies are going to resonate over this. So it stayed a lot longer than I thought it was going to be as well. I think On the Basis of Sex, I think that when they woke up the next morning and saw that they were in the top 10, that was a win. Whether they make their budget or not was irrelevant. They were like, oh my God. Like, how did this happen? So there are no real surprises. I think if anyone takes anything, I hope they take those as W's.
Yeah, well, I think On the Basis of Sex, the main reason it dropped out of the top 10 this week is it just didn't garner the award nominations that they were hoping for. And even I said for the last 2 weeks that I thought On the Basis of Sex was going to be a bit of a dark horse going into the Academy Awards. I thought it was going to pull in, a couple of nominations. It looks like the other Ruth Bader Ginsburg film got the nominations that On the Basis of Sex did not.
And I really like Meet Me Linda. She's made really good movies. She did Pay It Forward, and that crushed Deep Impact during the whole disaster film era of everything that could happen to blow up the world is going to blow up the world. For her to have been able to do what she did was great, but the moment I didn't see her get nominated, it just felt like the 18-year shine off of her last good movie was not enough. And I think the movie itself was very good and deserved something for sure. But I was not surprised that she wasn't a part of that, simply because it's been a long time she's been out the game for at the major level. for 18 years. I mean, I really thought we'd get one, but none was a bit of a surprise.
Number 10.
Getting into our countdown, we'll start off with number 10. Down from number 4 this week is Dragon Ball Super Broly from Funimation Studios, taking in $3.6 million, a 63.3% drop from last week. It only lost 133 screens, so it's still playing on just over 1,100 screens for a per-screen average of 3,258 and a cum of just under $29 million. Now, Dragon Ball Super was last week's biggest surprise, taking in a monstrous $10.6 million and coming in at number 3. But it's still a surprise to me to see that even a 63.3% drop, which by a lot of standards is unfavorable, but by something that's such a niche film and genre, to see it only being a 63.3% drop is actually pretty admirable. I mean, you look at something like Replicas, which was meant to be a mainstream film. I mean, that film dropped 81%. When here's something that's in a niche market that only had a 63% drop, it's about to breach $30 million, which for a domestic release of an anime, only 2 other animes have done that. Now, granted, it was the first 2 Pokemon movies. In terms of your interest, I mean, do you have an interest in the anime genre or the Dragon Ball franchise?
The staying power of Dragon Ball, it's kind of amazing. I mean, because if you think about it, people don't realize this. A lot of the Dragon Balls that we watched, those episodes, were years old. Like, they didn't get to us until 6-7 years after the show had not been on anything. Like, nothing had been drawn. If you find the right anime, you see Cowboy Bebop and certain animes that are phenomenal, but some of them didn't get stateside for 10, 15 years. To see the staying power of one particular anime being Dragon Ball is sort of amazing. People are going to show up for this movie. And I mean, we don't even have to look at foreign. Foreign is where animes, that's where they make their money no matter what. Most animes don't get past that second week without being down to like an independent theater somewhere in the middle of New York City meant for a specific group of people. It's a great thing for anime. Now you got to worry about one thing. Going forward, now you're going to see some movie exec that's going to go in there and say, okay, let's do this with the following 9 obscure animes that no one's going to know what the hell to do, and we're going to pump this into the ground. And then they're going to look around and go, what happened? That's always the danger. I always worry about that. They see the success of one, so now all of a sudden you're going to see Bleach and Cowboy Bebop and a couple of other things that are going to pop up, when honestly, I think Dragon Ball Z is probably the only one of staying power. Even, remember, it survived a horrifyingly bad live-action movie. Like, absolutely terrible live-action movie.
It was bad. It was very bad.
Very, very bad. Like, there was a fan film version of that was better. That's something that they poured $20-30 million into. And I think because of that, these animes will be great if you go VOD. Go to Netflix, go to Hulu, go to Prime. It'll work. But the moment you start trying to put this repeatedly on bigger screens, you run the risk of running whatever. You're going to lose your job or your studio is going to fall under. So I'm not surprised by the staying power. I just hope they don't abuse the staying power, like going back to what kind of hinting at with Transformers. They make money with 1, they make money with 2, then all of a sudden they just stop trying.
Even looking at, you're talking about staying power and kind of the brand. I mentioned this last week. You look at someone like, I said, the Walt Disney of Japanese animation being Hayao Miyazaki. None of his films have made what Dragon Ball Super Broly has done, and they get paraded out once a year as a film festival. I mean, talk about like My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle. Cumulatively, over all those screenings, all those times being exhibited, still haven't made what this movie's made. So it's a feat in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Number 9.
Moving on in the countdown now, we're up to number 9. Down from number 7 this week is Escape Room from Sony, making $4.2 million over the weekend, a 23.8% drop from last weekend. It lost roughly 517 screens to bring its screen count down to 2,192, per screen average of just under $2,000, and a cum of $47.9 million. Now, any movie, especially a horror movie, only dropping 23.8% in its 4th week of release now, has to say something either to the genre or just something to the fact that it's the only game in town of that genre.
I mean, horror, I sit and watch these, these budget analyses and about how genres are performing, which is legitimately not for studios, because I don't think most of these studios pay attention to that until it's too late. Whereas if you're an independent filmmaker, those graphs and those charts of what is more likely to get picked up at a major or mid-major film festival. And horror, if done right, is pretty bankable. You scare the crap out of people enough. Someone, will give you money for a few sequels. Like you look at Saw. Hell, you can look at as recent as Happy Death Day, which is now Happy Death Day to You, I loved it, and it was a great concept. But now you're going to see 4 or 5 of those. And horror, in the terms of, from a business standpoint, from a producer standpoint, is the easiest to stretch money and make more money over a 10 or 12-year period like nothing else. Escape Room was $9 million on a budget. If you really know, like if you do enough Hollywood math, if you include marketing, that's probably closer to like 14 million. But it made 65, and it's only been out, 2 weeks right now?
It's in its 4th week of release, yeah. It's even had some interest in the foreign markets because worldwide, it's up to $76.4 million.
That's against the $9 to $13 million budget. That's great. They've made their money back. Everyone who invested is going to get something in return, and they're just going to sit there and pocket this money, and that's awesome. Now you're going to see at least 3 more escape rooms, because if you get that first horror film right, a horror film is good if it gets more than 2. Horror movies in general, above all genres, as a producer, as a director, hell, as an actor or an actress, you could turn that into at least 4 or 5 different movies. The guy who produced this, Neil Moritz, he was a producer on a bunch of the Fast and Furious movies, but he was a part of a team that did the Urban Legend series, the I Know What You Did Last Summer series. So he, in the early 2000s, was doing this, and then those turned into about 3 to 4 films. And he's a really kind of a sequel junkie, so all these movies are going to get at least 2 or 3 more. But he's also a part of what might be already panned as pretty goddamn bad with the Sonic the Hedgehog movie that's going to come out at some point. It's exactly. So at this point, he's making his money now, because there's a good chance he's probably going to lose quite a bit on that.
And looking at Escape Room, something that does speak to what I would imagine is the quality of the horror film it is the fact that in its 4th week of release, it's only seen a just under 24% drop. I mean, there's a lot of horror movies that come out, make bank the first weekend, and are gone the next weekend. But here, Escape Room has been holding in there for 4 weeks now in the top 10. Now, granted, it's January.
January.
It's not a flood of new releases to push stuff out of the top 10.
For people who don't know, January is where movies go to die. But January and February are usually places where you go to put a movie that you're not necessarily sure, or it's probably had their calendar changed at least 2 or 3 times. I always cite the example of Jupiter Ascending, and that movie got changed so many times, and they said, you know what, we're just going to throw it earlier in the year.
January, February does seem also like the time that studios take these chances on these horror films. So Escape Rooms come out in January. I guarantee that the sequel will likely come out around the same time, probably next year. It'll probably come out in January, February of 2020. Yep. Even the same thing with Happy Death Day to You. Happy Death Day was a February release last year. Now Happy Death Day to You is coming out in February. So if you're trying to build a horror franchise and you want that kind of repetitive nature, which I think started with the Saw movies, because Saw's slogan after a while was, if it's Halloween, it must be Saw, because Saw came out every Halloween for 8 years in a row. Yeah, so I think that with horror franchises, if they get an audience hooked at a time period that worked for them where they don't have much to compete with, that's when they'll put out their sequels. So I won't be surprised to see Escape Room get a sequel and it be listed in January of 2020.
Number 8.
So moving on in the countdown now to a movie that did come to January to die, that is going to lose money for the studio, is Serenity from Averon. It's the first of the 2 new entries in the countdown this week. It's at number 8. Serenity took in $4.8 million on 2,561 screens for a per theater average of $1,874 per screen. Now, this film has been reviewed as reaching The Room levels of laughably bad, which really surprises me, because you have not 1, but 2 Academy Award-winning actors as your leads. I don't really know what to make of this. I watched the trailer a couple months ago when they first started rolling out. The trailer was a bit confusing to me. Everything I've been reading about this just screams that this movie is terrible. I mean, it's got a 21% on Rotten Tomatoes and a D+ on Cinema Score, so nobody is particularly liking this film. The reconnaissance is over. Now, I'm not saying that this is Sahara bad, but it could be Sahara bad. I don't know.
I gotta see it now. I need to see this for sure. The moment you drop Sahara, I'm like, oh, now I need to go see this.
So, Kevin, looking at Serenity, I mean, so as an actor, do you fire your agent after this? Now you're being compared to Tommy Wiseau.
Oh,
that's bad.
That's bad.
That's really bad. I mean, I guess there's some really laughable lines. I guess Matthew McConaughey's character is a boat captain with no money. But Diane Lane's in this movie, too.
Oh, man. Wow.
Yeah, Diane Lane's in this movie, too. She's early in one of the early scenes she's in this movie, having paid Matthew McConaughey for sex. And he makes a joke of, I'm a hooker who can't afford hooks.
Oh, my God.
Yes. So how, as an actor, how do you rebound from this?
There's a couple things that jump out to me. One, this kind of reminds me of the non-comic book version of what happened to Ryan Reynolds, where he was kind of, in his own words, sort of bullied into this because, of what this was supposed to be cast-wise. I really refuse, not for McConaughey. I feel like McConaughey is one bad night from going Nick Cage and just accepting everything. But
But that worked for Nick Cage because he put out Mandy last year, which almost completely brought his career back.
Yes, it did. And he just, it's one of those things. Nick Cage was like, I'm going to get 30 pitches. I'm just going to swing as hard as I can. One of them's going to go. And it did. And he's going to be in that Lovecraft film later on, next year. Some point, which I'm happy for him, but it took him a while. And now we look at McConaughey and I go, you know what? I'm going to ignore the fact that McConaughey is in it. I'm going to ignore the fact that Diane Lane was in it. What I am going to sit here and go is Anne Hathaway, who has, for all intent and purposes, not really done anything wrong in my eyes that made me go, what the hell she's doing? Like, but for her to be able to walk into this, I feel like there has to be a catch because everything else around them, and this is from a guy who writes and directs, I like Stephen Knight. I don't necessarily know that Anne Hathaway should have hitched her star to that guy, but if I'm Anne Hathaway, I'm probably firing my agent. If I'm Matthew McConaughey, I'm asking questions as to why this happened. Because if I fire my agent, I'm not necessarily sure I'm going to get another one for the next couple of years. As an actor, you bounce back by finding some indie thing that you can go opposite of this genre.
And that's exactly what Matthew McConaughey is doing. I don't know if you saw, and I think they did this purposely, knowing that their Serenity was being set up for failure. But trailers started rolling out this week for The Beach Bum.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a stoner comedy with Matthew McConaughey.
Super excited for that. So that I just saw that, and I did not put two and two together, but that makes sense. That is good PR by his people and by the studio because they knew early on that Serenity was probably going to suck. And then they saw those first numbers a couple of days beforehand. So let's roll out this, stoner comedy with, you see Martin Lawrence in it. There's a lot of goodwill in that film. So perfect time for them to be like, we need to wash the stank off of that. So you're allowed a couple of bombs here and there. But if this is like room level bad, they're probably pushing for them to roll out as many clips of that movie as possible.
Yeah, just to be like, no, Serenity never happened. Look at this thing. Look at this shiny thing over here. Don't pay attention to that over there. Look at this shiny thing over here.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 7.
Moving on in the countdown now, we are up to number 7. Down from number 6 this week is A Dog's Way Home from Sony, taking in $5.2 million, only a 27% drop from last week. It lost the most minimal of theaters, only a 9-theater drop to bring its screen count down to 3,081. Per screen average of just under $1,700 per screen, and a cum of $30.8 million. This film from Sony is another one of these kind of cliched genre films with calculated risk, much like Escape Room, that you just put out there as counter-programming to award season fare. I feel like January, February is a good time to start throwing family films out there, start throwing horror films out there, anything that's counter-programming to what is taking up a lot of the screens as award nominees and award winners. And for A Dog's Way Home, it succeeds in doing that. $18 million budget, third week in release, $30.8 million, $10.5 million from the foreign market, so $41.3 million total. I have a 7-year-old daughter. I know I'm going to see this movie. She talked about it again this past. First, she asked if the movie was out in theaters, and I was really, really tempted to be like, nope, they canceled it. but I can't do that. So I'm like, no, yeah, it's out in theaters. It's in the big theater. We're going to go see it at the little theater, which is code for I'm not spending $11 on my ticket to go see this movie. We'll go to the little theater, which is our independently owned second run theater where it's $5 for adults, $4 for kids.
Got one of those.
We'll go see it there.
Yeah.
We'll go see it there. I'm not going to Regal to pay $11 for your ticket and $14 for mine.
No.
To go see something I have zero interest in, and I know exactly what's going to happen. Do you have any younger kids around you in your life that talk about this film, or did you?
Thankfully, no. Thankfully, no. There's no. I have a dog who might be interested in it, but other than that, no. My niece, nephew, cousins, or anything. Nobody's mentioned this, and I'm happy about it because I'm a sucker for these movies. In terms of, I'll never see it, but if you put it on Netflix and it's like 11 o'clock and I'm bored, I might turn it on and get teary eyed about midway through because you know how this is going. You know, it's one of those. It's like with The Dog's Purpose, the guy who wrote the book. I think someone described him as the Nicholas Sparks of pet adventure, which I don't know how. If I'm him, I'm happy that I have a career within this, but I don't necessarily know if I want to be known as the Nicholas Sparks of pet books. That just seems off. But I do know the director, Charles Martin Smith. He's kind of gotten to this point where he's been typecast. He's in the sense of directing. He did A Dolphin's Tale, then he did A Dolphin's Tale 2. And now he's doing this. So let's assume he's come a long way from doing The Untouchables in 87. And it's going to be very interesting to see that next year they'll probably release something similar. And I still won't want to go see it. Zero interest in seeing a movie that's going to end up making me go home and hug my dog a little bit harder. So I'm sure that I will come across it on some VOD platform, but no one in my life is out there going, you know, hey, let's go see this movie. I'm like, nah, I'm good. I'll wait. I'll wait for a while.
Number 6.
The movie out of the countdown now, we're up to number 6. This movie is up from number 14. Green Book from Universal, taking in $5.4 million, a 150% increase from last week as it sees its theater count more than double, gaining 1,518 screens to bring its theater count up to 2,430, a per-screen average of just over 2,200 per screen. In its 11th week of release, it brings its total up to $49 million. Now, this film has been seeing the most love from the Academy Awards out of any of our other releases, short of obviously The Favorite, which was not in our top 10, even with the theater increase it got. Just to quickly touch on that, The Favorite, 10 Academy Award nominations from Fox Searchlight. While it's not in the top 10, it had some pretty favorable numbers. It took in $2.5 million. It saw a 214% increase from last week, and its theater count tripled up to 1,500 screens. So the Academy Awards can be real nice to your movie's box office.
Oh, yeah. You know, that the moment someone sneezes in your direction from the Academy, it's pretty much a wrap. That changes everything.
Yeah, so I mean, looking at the Green Book, though, it's getting a lot of really good reviews, a lot of really good press, and all in all seems like a really good movie. I mean, it's got an 82% on Rotten Tomatoes. It is a period piece in the sense that it takes place during the 50s and 60s, and it has to deal with thematic elements that seem to be a bit rampant in today's landscape. But Kevin, have you seen the Green Book? Are you going to go see the Green Book? What are your thoughts on it?
I'm definitely going to go see the Green Book. I know my mother and my grandmother both saw it from the perspective of, you know, that's a time that both of them existed in. So those films, they're a little bit more profound than it would be for me, even though they're still pertinent in not such an obvious way, but pertinent in today's age. I'm very interested in seeing it only because A, I've heard good things. B, Mahershala Ali is like, I love him. He's fantastic. I can't stress how wonderful it is to see him on screen. From Moonlight on, anything he's in, he kills. And also, what people don't know or maybe haven't been paying attention to, you know, this was directed by Peter Farrelly of the Farrelly brothers. So, you know, something about Mary, this type of stuff. This is I won't say it's a complete departure, but it's something if someone says the Farrelly brothers and then you name the movies that that drop off the top of your head when mentioning the Farrelly brothers and then going into Green Book, they made like Shallow Hal, Me, Myself, and Irene, Fever Pitch, Stuck on You.
Dumb and Dumber.
They did Dumber and Dumber 2 and then bam, Green Book. So it's like, it's definitely a departure, but it shows you what he can do. So I'm really, really interested and seeing what that looks like. And judging from everybody's reaction to it, it clearly is, a good departure. So I definitely want to see this for those factors alone.
Peter Farrelly also worked on the screenplay. He's part of the writing team for the screenplay as well. One of the things that I was glad to see with Green Book in its 5 Academy Award nominations was that the controversy surrounding the primary writer on the screenplay, Nick Vallelonga, with some old tweets that surfaced, especially with this Academy Awards ceremony, considering that its host, who's no longer its host, had to step down because of some old tweets that came back to haunt him. But to see that Nick Vallelonga's old tweets and the controversy that may have been stirred up from that didn't affect Green Book in getting its nominations, it wasn't shut out, much in the way that, unfortunately for Bohemian Rhapsody, earlier this week, in the wake of the Bryan Singer sexual allegations, Bohemian Rhapsody lost its GLAAD nominations. Do you have anything to chime in on this, Kevin? Like, were you aware that this happened to Bohemian Rhapsody, or were you aware of this tweet from Nick Vallelonga from years past?
Either one of them. I did not know you could get stripped from an award nomination. I just feel like the stuff from Nick Vallelonga I've kind of heard before, but I didn't know it was him. I've heard someone saying that before about someone saying, but I didn't know that was the same person. And honestly, from the perspective of GLAAD getting stripped, I don't think that's fair. That is not fair to the people who work 8, 10, 12 hours. I mean, we're both behind the camera. We're both on those sets. You could have been the cinematographer on that. And whatever Bryan Singer did beforehand had nothing to do with my work now. It's not like you went in there knowing that Bryan Singer did something heinous and messed up. That's not what this is about. So why punish a crew of 20, 30 to maybe even 80 people who wake up at 6 a.m. to make what you guys are even considering for award? I just feel like that's wrong. As for the Vallelonga stuff, listen, we're in an age where everything you've done and do are on display. If anything, what he did should be a lesson to anyone else. Listen, if you're in this industry and you make enough noise, someone's going to come looking for something you said wrong. The Bryan Singer thing is, in my head, is an absolute miscarriage of justice completely. Nobody should do that for one guy's illicit past.
Yeah, because I mean, I could see if Singer was there on the PR campaign through awards season, like he had completed production on the film, he had directed 100% of it, and now here he is on the PR campaign, looking for nominations, even for himself for Best Director or things for Bohemian Rhapsody. But he's not even there. Production had to halt because he stopped showing up. The director of photography, the cinematographer, was doing the day-to-day directing duties until they hired a new director. And so, Singer's behavior was erratic on that production, which is why he was let go. It's erratic in real life, which is why now these transgressions are coming forward. But on all accounts, you can't sit there and punish the film. And so I'm glad with the Green Book that one minor instance on Vallelonga's Twitter, which thankfully the film didn't take the hit that it could have taken.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
Moving on to the show, this is the segment where we're going to take an aside and get to know our guest co-host a little better. Kevin, talking about trying to rise from anonymity to prominence. This is a hustle that you and I are both involved in, being independent artists in the film industry, trying to make a name for ourselves. Tell us a little bit about what you do and the very kind of Renaissance man nature that you envelop. I mean, not only are you a director, you're a screenwriter, you have Kaleidosite Films, but you're also an athlete, stand-up comedian, and a manager for bands and artists, correct?
Yes. I played overseas for 13 years, from country to country, predominantly a lot in Germany, in Austria. I played a lot in South America as well. During that time, especially overseas, I've been writing. I sold my first scripts when I was in college. I was not allowed to collect on those because in the NCAA rules and their infinite wisdom, I can't get paid to do those things. So it wasn't until afterward that as a ghostwriter for a teacher and a couple other people, I was able to, start doing it. And that's primarily where I was. I basically was taught the game by a number of important people in my life, some family members who were in the music and film. And it grew into Kaleidosite Films. So I direct. Screenwriting is my first love. You see me with a bag of notebooks that have these ideas or scripts that I handwrite first before I type them out. But I screenwrite, direct. I do cinematography as well. I produce both line and produce. That's pretty much my day job. I've been very lucky to get a lot of freelance work from the producer and writing standpoint. I also write for a bunch of comedians to the point where a good friend of mine, who I've known since high school, we used to get a lot of trouble in high school together, and fun trouble the way we look at it now. But
trouble that makes you glad that we didn't grow up in a time period that Facebook and Twitter existed.
Exactly. So he convinced me one night. His name is Gordon Baker Bone, fantastic comedian, probably one of the best in the tri-state area. He convinced me to get up on stage one night because I was writing jokes for other people that were out of the area in Florida, but I kept getting told my jokes sound better coming out of my own mouth, and I popped up on stage. I'm a giant, so I don't really get shy. I'm 6'10". So get up on stage and getting stared at is no different than me walking through the airport and people wondering where I'm going to sit in the airplane. Like, please give him first class.
Or the men's public bathroom, because I've heard your bit on that.
Ooh, yes. And that bit still, to this day, kills. Absolutely, because it's true. That's the thing. A lot of this stuff I write is not me coming up with it. It's like situations that I might have to trump up a little bit, but for the most part, the comedy is there. So I've bounced all over. I've retired. I lived in Las Vegas. Then I was in Florida. I worked on Location Scout on a couple of projects, the few that are down there. Those moved or dried up. And then I ended up back up to New York and New Jersey because I was getting work up here anyway. And I moved toward the shore area. People don't know this, other than Asbury Park being the home of the Boss, there's some fantastic bands that were there, that are still there, that are doing very, very well. I befriended a bunch of them, started giving them advice because music is in my family. There's a lot of people I know who worked in labels. I've done booking for bands and stuff like that in the past. I actually started a label out of the production company so I would be able to license a lot of the stuff for these indie bands so they would be able to make money while I would be able to have a really good soundtrack to whatever I was doing. And that gained me more access to music supervisors, etc. And then I fell in love with music all over again. So then when I came back up here, I'm like, I'm not going to get back into music. And sure enough, now I manage 5 bands and I book for 3 venues, which is awesome. So I manage the Mercury Brothers, Dave Mooney and Viewers Like You, Arlen Feelies, Ellis Wilkinson, Deirdre Forrest. It's one of those things where you try something in the interim or during the time you're doing your other projects and you're like, oh, okay, if this works out, great. And if it doesn't, we'll be all right. And they all worked out at the same time. So it's and that's 3143 Artist Management that I run that day to day with my VP of my production company, Matthew Manak, who is my editor and vice president. We've worked together for a couple of years now. He is my right-hand man. He makes everything easier for me. He's also my main editor. And that's basically it. 2019 is going to be incredible. It's going to be very, very busy. I'll be up on stage a lot more this year. I have a number of projects that are in film festivals right now. Wink Bank the series, that's making the rounds right now. I've got a couple of announcements regarding that in a couple of days. The screenwriting has been amazing. I've had a lot of projects, done a lot of rewrites, and I got recently attached to direct this upcoming boxing drama called Stay Hungry, written by Dino Jones. It's based in the UK. So right now we're in the second or third draft of it. Looks very, very good. I think we'll probably be able to start production at the end of this year coming. So I'm super excited about that.
That's great. And of course, as always, need a guy behind the camera. I know a guy.
There's one thing I've learned very, very quickly, which is, even for my own projects, I do not have an interest in directing and doing cinematography. And I would always defer to someone who's as good. You are fantastic, John. So it's like I would happily be like, hey, can I bring my own cinematographer, please? And you would be literally the only call I would make. I wouldn't even call anyone else. So that's a no-brainer.
Well, flattered by that. I'm blushing over airwaves. What's next? What's the first thing coming over the horizon that either yourself as a screenwriter or director or artist management, what's the first thing coming over the horizon that we can look for that is that you do?
I have an anthology series called Intel Ghoul, which is basically a sci-fi kind of a spy series, basically talking about what goes on behind the curtain of the Republic to keep it safe. It's a 6-part series. I tend to call them micro shorts, but everyone calls them episodes because they're interconnected, but in a specific way. The first one will be filmed end of February. Also, I've recently got a pilot that was optioned called Thirst, which is basically the black guy version of Sex and the City meets Insecure. That's going to be in production in June. And then finally, the web series, the thing I've been working on for almost two and a half years, called Clipped. It's about a angel who falls to Earth with no memory of why she's there, but knows that her newly found roommates are some people that she has to protect at all costs. It's kind of like Doctor Who meets Quantum Leap, which is my favorite sentence in the English language. I'm really excited about those three projects. From the music side of things, one of the bands I manage, the Mercury Brothers, they'll be releasing their live album sometime this year. I did a lot of the footage for as well. Then Ellis Wilkinson, another band that I manage, his album is going to drop, I believe, March 29th or April 4th, because then 3143 is having a huge show at the Asbury Lanes, a giant venue that's, well, recreation of the old venue that was approved, and now it's like this big venue that kind of dominated the Asbury scene and most of Jersey that when it isn't PNC. That will happen April 6th. And then I have a couple of shows in February and March down in Philly for stand-up. That will happen the first week of March and the last week of March. Both will be in Philly. And that's and then I have two more during the summer on some bigger stages. And I'm hoping to get into Fringe in Scotland at the end of the summer. There'll be a lot of flying around, a lot of bouncing around, a lot of things, in the fire, all of them cooking very well. So I hope they stay that way.
One question I want to ask, so you as a filmmaker and having been an individual who's traveled the world, traveled to many different countries, has the eclectic variety of cultures that you've been to, have they contributed either aesthetically or stylistically? Were you checking out films regularly while you were in these foreign countries?
Absolutely. To be very, very honest with you, anything going forward that's made me a good filmmaker or, for some people, a very good filmmaker in their head, writing or, being behind the camera or directing, has been because of my time overseas. I did some stuff in the UK where all I did was make a comment while shooting. A friend of mine was shooting something and he was like, "You have a good eye. You should, do this more." And it was, summers of doing that in between basketball and stuff like that. So for me, being overseas was maybe the most rewarding in any which way, shape, or form. That is contributed to my writing. It definitely aesthetically really contributed to the film stuff. I've done 2 foreign films in languages that that are second and third to me. This micro short that for the anthology is in complete Japanese. I'm truly fascinated by bringing American concepts, mixing them with more foreign language, dialect, and culture. And because that's essentially what it was. I was an American playing in Germany. I was an American playing in Austria. I was an American playing in South Korea. And I mixed in to their culture because I'm in their country. Those ideas, the thousands upon thousands of man hours in writing that I put into it, are the love child of those 13 years of experience. Definitely contributed in every which way to me creatively, from something as simple as jokes to something as major as writing a screenplay. I still don't even think I described how important it was to me, even how I said it now.
I want to thank you, and we're going to get it back into the countdown in a second, but I mean, what websites, what links should people check out to see what you do?
For most of the film stuff, it's kaleidositefilms.com. That's KALEIDOSIGHTFILMS, all one word.com. You'll see a lot of projects there that are coming up. It's pretty, we're pretty active and lively, so that's awesome. For the music stuff, for you music supervisors out there, you'll go to 3143mgmt.com. You'll see all of the musicians that are there, links to what they do and how they do it. And if you're interested, email me, kmartin@3143mgmt.com. And I'm always down to collaborate, so you'll see that on that Kaleidosite site. Hit that info and send me some stuff. I'm always ready to work.
Are Kaleidosite and 3143 management on Twitter or
Yes.
Instagram?
So on Instagram, Kaleidosite Films, all one word. And on Instagram, same thing for 3143 Artist on Instagram. Same name on Twitter as well. The Twitter is, for the most part, not as active, but the Instagram is very, very active. And you can also find me on Instagram at codename_Leon and laugh at me and my dog pics.
All right. Well, Kevin, thanks a lot for sharing with us some information on you and what you do.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Number 5.
So we're gonna get back into the countdown now, and at number 5 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse from Sony. Spider-Man stays at number 5 from last week, where it was as well. This week, taking in $6.1 million, only an 18% drop from last week. The film loses about 329 screens to bring its count down to 2,383. It averaged just under 2,600 per screen for a cume of $169 million. The film's now in its 7th week of release. I'm very happy to see it performing as well as it has, and to only drop 18% from weekend to weekend last week to this is rather impressive. And I think that has partially to do with the fact that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did receive an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Film, but also just because visually and from a storytelling point of view, it's just a really good film. It's got good characters, good story. Aesthetically, it's just a real treat to watch. I mean, there's no question in my mind when nominations were coming out that this was going to be included in a lot of nominees. Is this a film that you've had an opportunity to see, Kevin?
Yes, and honestly, one of those things where, as an adult man or woman, you go, "No, I'm not going to go see this cartoon." Blah 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 blah, and then you sit there and you go and you see this thing and you go, "Okay, this is kind of dope," and that's like, it's a great feeling to see that. It might be the best of the Spider-Man series. And that's saying a lot, well, not too much. Tobey Maguire stuff I won't go into, but like the Andrew Garfield stuff and what they were trying to do with Sony. Now, there's a distinct difference in styles. It turned out to be much better, much better than I expected. But that's like when you go in there and go, I'm going to go see this animated movie and hope to God I'm not sitting there with a room full of kids. Nope. Grown adults, and it's worth it. It's definitely worth it.
It was great to watch, and when I went to see it, I took my daughter to see it because she really wanted to see it. And yeah, there were kids in the screening I went to as well, but it was something that universally every person in every seat of that theater found entertainment in it, and that's can be kind of rare.
Oh yeah, absolutely. To get everyone on the same page for something that's technically supposed to be specifically geared, if only by look, for children or mid-teens, but get everyone basically on the same page, that's hard and that's rough. But that shows you a lot about A, the character itself, B, the Sony Marvel, how they've managed to work a symbiotic relationship, which is funny to say.
Even the previous property being Venom.
Venom, yeah, exactly. So they've worked out really, really well, better than Fox did at any point in time with Disney or even trying to do. And now all those things together, you see how important Spider-Man can be as a whole. That's a viable franchise that you could run with for a while, and they have, and they've gotten it right.
So I'll be looking forward to seeing, where the Spider-Verse takes us.
Number 4.
So moving on in the countdown now, we're up to number 4. It's our other new entry of the week, and that is The Kid Who Would Be King from Fox, which took in $7.2 million, opening on 3,521 screens for a per-screen average of only $2,059. This film, while it lacked marketing, also seemed to lack interest, which is unfortunate because looking at the numbers, your first blush response is to be like, oh, well, this film must suck. It didn't perform well. It's got a low per theater average on a lot of screens. But I looked a little bit deeper and I looked at the Rotten Tomatoes and the Cinema Score, and it's got an 86 on Rotten Tomatoes and a B+ on Cinema Score, which means critics actually kind of like it, and audiences for the most part like it. It's not an A, but I mean B+ is far better than the D+ Serenity got, the other new release this weekend. So where did this go wrong, do you think, Kevin? Where did this film just go wrong?
The King Arthur IP is the most, probably in my opinion anyway, most overdone IP in our time between now and 1999. I think there's been 10 modernizations since 99, and then there's been like almost 12 different adaptations of the same story. You sit there and you go, okay, well, that doesn't sound great. How can I make it worse, Kevin? Well, you can go to 20th Century Fox, who at this point right now just seem to have given up on literally everything. It's like, all right, it's 20th Century Fox. We don't care about movies anymore. So we've just been bought and traded and we're done. And it shows because you spent $59 million on this budget and you had minimal marketing. You really don't have a crap ton of names. And when it comes down to it, probably a bunch of VFX. But even if you, at the bare minimum of those VFX, you don't need to spend $59 million and only get 10 in return. Someone's going to lose their job.
Let's be honest, with the recent acquisition of Fox by Disney, Fox is going to become Disney's tax break.
100%. And honestly, I think a lot of the movies that we're seeing that are left over on the slate before the finalization of the deal are going to be Fox going, well, you know, it's not our problem anymore. So they're not, like, for example, there's an X-Men movie coming out, New Mutants, that was supposed to come out last year this time and then got pushed to this year this time, and it got reshot 90% of the movie, and they added a new character, and then Fox got bought, and you have seen nothing about it outside of X-Men Dark Phoenix. And the reason for that, and I have a theory, is Fox decided that they're not going to promote any of this stuff. They're not going to make much money on it, so why promote this? That's as pretty petty as you're going to get. But you promote the X-Men because at some point in time, there's going to be a connection between the two universes, because Disney has not said that they're going to replace or redo the X-Men, which has been redone to death. I just get mad because I feel like the King Arthur IP has been done just so much. It feels like every 2 years or every 3 years, someone has come up, like, what's the pitch in one of those meetings? It's like, all right, I know you've heard this before, but King Arthur in space. What is this, the whole story? I mean, hell, even the Transformers went to last night at one point, and that was in the year of Legends of the Sword, which 2 years before that was Arthur and Merlin, which 1 year before that was Dragons of Camelot. So it's like, you gotta give it a breather. I think people are King Arthur'd out. I think there was like 2 TV shows of the same thing as well. So they got to give this time. It's probably a good movie, but people are tired of seeing the same thing.
2 years from now, we're going to see some other, it'll probably be a gritty one. It'll seesaw back and forth. Oh, we did the kids one. Now we're going to do a gritty King Arthur. It's like, yeah, well, unless you're going to go back and right the wrong of letting Antoine Fuqua release his rated R version of King Arthur that was supposed to come out in 2003 and not release it as a PG-13 version because John Carter of Mars, shit the bed.
Yeah.
You can't write that ship at this point. Antoine Fuqua had what could have been a good King Arthur movie, and you neutered it.
Yeah, you did.
And for the sake of making a box office dollars in the summer, and guess what? That movie failed too, because it lost all of its grit and attitude because you had to make it PG-13.
I don't understand it. And now, as I'm talking to you now, I realize I just said Robin Hood or King Arthur in space. I got $20 says somebody hears this along the line and goes, that's a great idea. In 3 years, we're going to see King Arthur in space. And I'm going to be like, you know what? As much as I would like to chase you down for that money, something tells me you guys are going to lose a lot more than that.
Yeah.
King Arthur in space. I guarantee it. If 3 years from now and you see, you're going to hit me up and be like, Kev, you're not going to believe this.
But then you're going to say, oh, I believe it.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're going to say. Where is it? It was in Hollywood Reporter. They've attached Al Pacino or something ridiculous. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
They'll attach Nick Cage.
No, he's back.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 3.
So moving on to the countdown now, staying at number 3 this week is Aquaman from Warner Brothers, taking in $7.3 million, only a 27.8% drop from last week. The film only lost 341 screens, bringing its screen total down to 3,134. It had a per-screen average of $2,300 and has brought its cume up to $316.5 million domestic and nearly $1.1 billion worldwide in its 6th week of release. There's not much more that I can say about Aquaman that I haven't said the last few weeks, so I'm going to leave this one up to Kevin to tell me what his thoughts are on Aquaman, but I will just kind of set it up by saying my running theme is I was entertained by Aquaman, but I felt like it was Marvel light. I felt like DC was using Marvel's formula to make Aquaman, and that moving forward, all they're going to do is confuse their fan base when they have to go back to being so dark and serious. But what's your take on Aquaman?
I mean, You pretty much nailed it, because I've kind of, when they do go back on Twitter, I hope they stop at the whole campaign I had said, let me run DC for a year, because they should have been following the formula to begin with. They screwed the pooch on it bad. And I say that because I get it. They want to do it their own way, blah, blah, blah. Two things that really snake bites DC, and it's not recognizing that the formula, for all intent and purposes, though it's too late in many people's eyes to do that now. Now you either have to stick with that while looking like you're copying everything Marvel's doing, or you go back to being dark. Now you might mess around and alienate the people who come to see what you do. So now they're going to put out Shazam. Shazam looks like it's on par with what Aquaman is. So now you've got two movies that are a little bit lighter, and you're going to then somewhere bring in the Batman and go, okay, this is how it's going to go. Now, the other thing that snake bites DC, going back to what it is when their involvement is minimum, the movie is better. The only three movies that I've heard that they've had minimal involvement, and one I know for a fact was Aquaman, Wonder Woman, and apparently Shazam. What they're doing wrong is they're catching up too late. They're figuring out the formula wasn't hard to find at all. It was legitimately there. Marvel did it for 12 years, and they're at the point where Marvel cannot miss. They cannot lose. And they can put out what would be a bad movie, which some people would probably say is Iron Man 3. But then if you look at Iron Man 3 compared to what DC has put out in the last 2 years, and you might as well give Iron Man 3 and Robert Downey Jr. a damn Oscar. Going forward, I loved what Aquaman was. It was a complete Marvel light movie. You're absolutely right. But if they had did that with their earlier movies to begin with, we wouldn't be calling it Marvel light. We'd be calling it, well, that's the comic book movie formula. So they either have to stick with this and just go with the fact that every time you do a movie with somebody, they're going to call it Wet Thor, or now you're going to have to try to go back to whatever this dark brooding stuff that you let Zack Snyder kind of run ragged into. And it didn't work. And there's no synchronicity. There's no consistency. It makes no sense that your DC properties on television are better than most of your movies that you've put out there. Meanwhile, you've got Marvel, who's kind of snaked through a lot of these films. They're all connected to each other in some which way, shape, or form. Even the TV stuff.
I've just thought of the best way to encapsulate what DC is versus Marvel. Marvel's the formula, and DC is Common Core math.
Yes. Yes.
It's another way to get there, but it's super complicated and nobody likes it.
That's the perfect analogy. It's like, here's how you do a movie, but we're going to make this super hard because why not? We're bored.
Number 2.
So moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 2. And at number 2, sitting put at number 2, is The Upside from STX Entertainment. This week, The Upside took in $12.2 million, only an 18% drop from last week. It picked up a few theaters, gaining 57 screens to bring its count up to 3,377. The film had a per-screen average of 3,625 and brings its total up to $63.1 million in its third week of release. The Upside is proving to be quite the juggernaut at the box office. Last week only dropping, I believe, 22%. This week only dropping 18%. It's an anomaly in the current box office landscape because it's not an award season darling. It's not a genre film in the sense that it's, a family or horror film. It's just generally being received as a good film, at least by moviegoers. Critics, not so much, but they usually have their own agenda. The Upside also seemingly has a coating of Teflon around it, just to knock away all the things that should hurt a movie. I mentioned last week talking about, Bryan Cranston and the idea that he was under fire for taking a role that he plays a quadriplegic when he's not really quadriplegic, or going back further around the time that the movie's launch, Kevin Hart stepping down from the Academy Awards because of past Twitter transgressions and those ghosts coming back to haunt him. Even going back even further to a couple other things that should have made this film dead in the water. The extended period of time that the film was shelved for. I mean, it was supposed to come out a year ago.
Yeah, it was supposed to come out in 2017.
Yeah, the fact that it was associated originally with the Weinstein Group. It was a property of theirs to start with. The Upside seemingly is coated in Teflon. Nothing can harm it at this point, and it just keeps raking in box office dollars. It really surprises me. What are your thoughts on it, Kevin?
It's one of those things where, and I wish I could figure out that formula, because it does, now it feels like Common Core again, because there are movies that you could make that could be filled with people who are laden with controversy. And they come together and something ridiculously special happens. And you're like, okay, well, this is fine. Wait, you just said you're upset with him for pretending to be a paraplegic. No, I don't care. It's very strange. It's like, how do you get to a point where you make a movie that 2 days ago would have been all over the news, but 2 days later, no one cares, despite people screaming into the rooftops that this, and this. And I think there's an exhaustion in terms of the complaint politics of films, because at this point, if you really look at a film, you can complain about everything. So like, people get tired of the complaint politics of film before the critics who, as you said before, have their own agenda. I was able to see it. I thought it was great. I was surprised because I never thought Kevin Hart had really a lot of range. I mean, anytime I see Kevin Hart on screen for a second, if he's not with The Rock, I just automatically think Soul Plane. And I go, I'm not watching this. So it's like, yes, Bryan Cranston is not a quadriplegic. I am very sorry for you guys that did not know that. He was also not a guy slinging meth in real life. He was also not an emotionally abusive dad to Malcolm, who was in the middle. He's an actor. And as an actor, you sit there and you figure out how to become this character. The best thing I ever did in my life was to go to acting classes to understand why in the tick of these people who act and put themselves out there. It's another level than, people who are method. That's another level. But you're not going to get mad at Robert Downey Jr. in The Judge because he's not really a judge, so he shouldn't be playing it, Hell, the best example of a Teflon-coated movie, Tropic Thunder. Robert Downey Jr. played blackface.
Oh my God, yeah.
Robert Downey Jr.
Well, with that example, though, that really came out just on the cusp, just before the complaint politics came into play. If you release Tropic Thunder now, Robert Downey Jr. gets run out of town.
He would never be able to find a job again. But the thing is, he nailed it. I have an uncle who sounds just like that. We're good. So he's not really a black guy, but that, even though now, yes, absolutely, the movie couldn't be released, but that's what it is. And it's a problem because complaint politics ruins a story that's a fantasy or an idea that got turned into reality. Look at it that way. But, critics are like, oh, well, it's this, and this. Well, they could have done better than having Bryan Cranston. No, you couldn't. Put me in that chair. How many people are going to come see me act like a quadriplegic? It's more insulting if you don't put a professional. That's what star power is.
Number 1.
So we've made it. We're up to number 1 at the countdown. And still at number 1 for the second weekend in a row is Glass from Universal, taking in $19 million, a 52.8% drop from last week. Picked up the smallest margin of theaters, gaining 3 screens and bringing its count up to 3,844. The film averaged just under $5,000 per screen and has brought its cume up to $73.5 million in its second week of release. I had anticipated last week that Glass was going to drop around the traditional 50%, but that if it did more, if it dropped further than 50%, it would be exclusively on the count of word of mouth. Mm-hmm. Word of mouth is still mixed on the film. I mean, it's still got a 36% on Rotten Tomatoes, still has a B on Cinema Score, and in talking to a lot of people who have seen it, who have been waiting so long for it to come out after Unbreakable and Split, they themselves have had mixed reviews. It trended towards a positive feeling about it. Some people I know came away from it feeling a little unsatisfied, like something wasn't fulfilled for them in the storytelling. In reading something on your Facebook feed, Kevin, you're in that crowd, right? You're the people that had enjoyed it, but something felt unfulfilling about it in terms of being a universe.
Yeah, it felt like M. Night, who, you're waiting for the plot twist or whatever it was. I feel like 30 minutes in, and maybe that whole scene in the courtyard, this felt like he made this movie because he was surprised he got the movie. That makes any sense. You know what I mean? Like,
but real quick on Glass, to add a twist, pun intended, to the story, the $20 million budget that was put up for this film is out of M. Night Shyamalan's pocket.
Wow.
How does that change things? Now knowing that he put up the money, this is his movie, he's the auteur, so to speak, and Universal's just distributing it.
Wow.
Now knowing that twist, what are your thoughts on that?
If if this is out of his pocket and that's what he put with $20 million, yeah, this movie is really bad. It's not. If you're telling me if you pulled $20 million out of your own pocket and that's what you came up with out of your own pocket, Sean, you're telling me if I give you $20 million and a good script, you can't make a movie better than that? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. $20 million with a producer from the studio over your shoulder getting pushed, I get it. $20 million and you get a distro deal from Universal before the movie is even shot. The audience that has waited 20, 25 years for you to do this deserves a better movie then. I was just not totally sold on it, and I'll happily admit walked in there with the thought process of, please don't be the village. Please don't be the village. Please don't be the village. Don't give me a twist that I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This isn't creative. This is ridiculous. I am definitely turned off to the movie even more so now that when I saw it, because he had the chance to have $20 million and that's what he got. I mean, he should make the budget back. It's a $20 million, so he'll make the budget back for sure.
Worldwide, it's up to $162 million. So M. Night's made his $20 million back. And just to kind of go one step further with M. Night putting up to $20 million, I don't know if you know this also, but Split and The Visit. So Split had a $9 million budget. The Visit had a $5 million budget. Both of those films also out of M. Night Shyamalan's pocket.
I'll give him this. If he's making movies out of his own pocket and getting distro, then he's kind of achieved the dream that I think as a filmmaker, I would love to be able to do, where you don't have to use investment dollars. That's awesome. And I would love to be in that position one day. But if you're in control of your own destiny like that, you got to get to a point where you have to know that you have to give a better product than that for $20 million or $9. For Split was great. Split was essentially one location with, guy playing 9 people and 3 other characters. For $20 million, this is what happens. Sometimes people think the thing that fixes things is more money. More money makes things worse. More money, more problems. Now I really want to do the research and see what that production schedule is like, all that stuff, because you got to know you probably had more time with $20 million than you did with the $9 million you did for Split. Why is it with more time you produced a movie that, for all intent and purposes, wasn't your worst by a lot, but was not your best? I don't understand how that's plausible.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. When you put up the money, you therefore get to take all the blame, like we're talking about right now. Yeah. You look at some movies we talked about earlier. So we talked about Antoine Fuqua's King Arthur, right? So that movie comes out and it's hot garbage. Yep. Antoine Fuqua can just point at Disney. We talked about Jupiter Ascending. That movie also hot garbage. But the Wachowskis can just point at their studio. In interviews with the Wachowskis, they said that they had a whole script. And granted, they knew that their script was very bloated. Jupiter Ascending would have been like a 5 or 6 hour film. Yep. And the distributor was just like, well, no, you've got an hour and 40 minutes. So in both of these cases, when other people are in control of the money and the product is bad, you can just point at them, just be like, oh, well, it's their fault. In this case, if you put up the money and you have the creative control, the only person telling you anything is Universal saying, hey, we want to put this out, and that's the only thing that you got anybody telling you about, then when you tell them I'm ready, you better make sure I'm ready. And from what you're telling me is he wasn't ready.
He clearly was in a rush. He should have, like you said, been like, look, we got to hold off. You held off on Split for damn near 2 decades. Yeah, it could have held off another year or 2 or 3 or 4. It's not like people are foaming at the mouth to see an M. Night Shyamalan movie. The stank of The Village is still really there. He did After Earth. So you knew anything he was doing from 2010, The Last Airbender, to Glass, he had all the time in the world to just be like, you know what? I'm going to take my time with this. If you think of his filmography, you close your eyes and think, what was the last M. Night Shyamalan movie that was of any good? He probably lost you either at The Village, Lady in the Water, or The Happening. The Happening probably got everyone off the boat. Like, screw him. The Trees, really? No, like, everyone just jumped off the boat. So no one was looking for it. So I want to know, with all your own money invested in this project, only having distribution with Universal, why in God's name would you not take your time? Split came out in 2016. What's another year? What's another 2 years? I don't genuinely understand what that rush was. I would love to sit down one day and be like, M. Night, tell me what happened with Glass. That really changed my entire perspective. I did not know that was all his money. And so he has no excuse for a movie that's getting beaten up a little bit. But he's going to make his money, and then they're going to try to talk to him into doing it again. And hopefully he waits another 20 years. I hope he waits another 20 years. Please.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
That does it for us for the countdown, but I wanted to touch on one other topic, which is right on the tip of everyone's tongue, having had the Academy Award nominations come out earlier this past week. Obviously, the big stories are The Favorite and Roma leading the packs with 10 nominations apiece, but Roma is where it gets to a bit of a sticking point for me, and I'm really interested to discuss this matter with you. So Roma, for those of you who don't know, is a film that Netflix put out. And if you're wondering, well, I don't remember seeing it in the theaters. I don't remember seeing it on the box office reports. I don't remember really seeing it much of anything to do with a release. It's because, by and large, it wasn't. Roma spent about 30 days in theaters in South Korea, and it spent the bare minimum for eligibility requirements for the Oscars, which is 7 consecutive days at a commercial theater in Los Angeles County, at least 3 showtimes a day, with one of those showtimes being between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. It met those bare minimum eligibility requirements, and so here it is at 10 nominations. This has left a very sour taste in the mouths of exhibitors, particularly the movie theater chains, because the kind of rule of thumb has been all along that, yes, that's the bare minimum. But what traditionally is accepted is a 90-day theatrical release window. A film would come out for 90 days in theaters to satisfy both exhibitors and studios to meet the Academy's requirements to then be considered for nomination. Roma completely diverts from this path, just by and large, just avoids the expectation is by studios and exhibitors. These same exhibitors, particularly AMC and Regal, have become so salty over it in their Best Picture showcases, which is a yearly event. You buy a pass, you can see all the Best Picture nominees. They have excluded Roma. So don't expect to see Roma in theaters anytime soon. You're going to have to watch it exclusively on Netflix. With all this going on, and let's also not forget that Netflix earlier this week became the first streaming service to register with the MPAA, which is a huge deal. And we'll get into that in a second. With all this going on, Kevin, what does Netflix kind of bucking the system and succeeding do for exhibitors, for filmmakers, for production companies in general? Like, how does this really alter the landscape of like what you do with your movie once it's in the can?
This will easily, in my head, be the biggest blow to the studio system since VOD started making their own streams and their own original content. I think it might be a worse blow. When the streams were making their own original content, it was at a smaller scale. You know, Netflix operates at a loss all the time, and that's fine. But it was at a smaller scale. Here and there, you know, Prime and blah, blah, blah. Hulu was barely in existence. But now you're telling me as a filmmaker, as a guy who writes, produces, directs, and does the cinematography for a lot of things, including his own, has a new avenue in which you don't necessarily have to even come within sniffing distance of the studio. Like, I could put something that can get into a decent to mid-level festival, and Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, or somebody who might eventually join the MPAA can get to it without jumping through all the normal hoops of getting your film into it. That is a gunshot wound to the artery for major studios, because now, as a filmmaker, I know for a fact, if I get something into Sundance, Tribeca, Austin, Telluride, any of those major festivals, I can jump the studio. I don't need the studio system at all. Hell, you can cut out the middleman completely now. And that's scary for them, but amazing for us. 100% best news in the world, because now, as a guy who's had to navigate that system, who has to, you know, go to a guy to go to Cinefilm, who has to pay like $10,000 to get into indie theaters in Miami, New York, and LA, and all this extracurricular stuff, there's a lot less hoops to jump. That makes it, this kind of makes me feel like when the consumer market was open to the DSLR systems and cameras, because now everyone who has the patience can make a film. It may not be the best looking film, but now you can try. It opened up a new world of new generation of filmmakers. Now, within that, the filmmakers themselves, it opens up a whole new world of where you can go with an idea that you're creative with, and you don't have to go to Universal and those big dogs. You just have to show up, Get a film that's good enough to get into a festival that's of note, and then wait for them to come get you. And then if it's really good, they'll put it in specific places just for them to make it. But now that Netflix is MPAA, you get them picked up by Netflix. That's all you need. That's amazing. If I'm in the studio executive, I'm pulling out what little hair I've probably lost over the last decade. But as a filmmaker, for myself, for you, that's amazing. I saw that and I quietly punched the air like, that's big. Now you just have to get into a good festival, pay a middleman much less than what he's worth now, because he's probably not worth that much. Get into Netflix, get into Prime, get into Hulu, and now you're there. Now, let's see if it's an award-worthy film.
Where do we go from here? Like, is this the shot fired that starts the war, or do we find a way to make a compromise, meet in the middle, and reconcile somehow with the traditional theatrical exhibitors, at least for getting your film on screens in a theater?
I think this is VOD crossing into enemy territory successfully, breaking through the line. That's what it is. I think there's a front. You got your South front, your North front. They're fighting each other there. It's a war of attrition for a time. And then someone breaks the line. This breaks the line because there is no way to reconcile us. And I say that because as petty as it is for the theaters to not include Roma, you understand why they don't include Roma. And that's simple, because by including Roma, you're legitimizing that this is another option that might as well be cheaper in the long run. And that's the problem. The problem is you cannot reconcile. That line is never going to go away. That line's going to get dug deeper. And as a movie chain, you're giving them the option. You don't want them to have the option. Hell, you don't want Netflix and any of them to exist because your bottom line is hurt. Someone, you know how many people I've heard say a movie, I'll wait until it comes out on Netflix. I'll wait till I see it on Prime. So now they're feeling like, oh my God, there's so many people who have Netflix, Hulu, Prime, all of these things. And guess what? Now, if you write something or you make something or produce something, some filmmakers' first thought process is, let me go VOD because it might be too expensive to find a distributor. The hurdle is lower now. So, of course, I get why they don't do it. They don't do it because it shows them an option. But the war, this war is only going to get worse. As much as I love going to the movies, this is bad for movie theaters. And in a way, I don't see how they win this war. For sure, it's not the shot. This is them breaking through the lines and heading toward the Capitol. And they've got a lot of weapons. And I don't see how movie theaters protect themselves for long from something that's been kind of looming for the last decade.
Looking at this war now, okay, so they've broken the line. Are movie theater distributors, are they smart enough to retreat or wave the white flag, or do they fight until every soldier is dead on the field?
I think they fight till there's no one standing. The problem is, with many things involving technology, one of the main things that happens to a lot of industries is how they don't advance with it's like finding clean energy. Coal, no one uses coal anymore. You find another way. In this case, as a movie theater, you either figure out a new way to get the same thing.
They faced a smaller battle when the whole go digital or go dark came forward, when we were moving away from celluloid proper to digital and DCPs. Theaters then dug their heels in. They fought that battle. And a lot of the theaters survived going digital or go dark. They went digital, fine, they gave in. This is not something that they can do that. They cannot just take collateral damage and keep operating.
Yeah.
Down the road, they will either win the war, which I don't see happening, or they will lose everything, but they will dig their heels in. And all they're going to do is to try and make their bottom line still succeed is just ticket prices are going to go up. Concessions are going to go up. And so really they're just hurting themselves further, and they're digging their own grave at this point. And
there's nothing in movies past and movie industries past in terms of these theaters that makes me think, as you said, that they're going to be like, okay, let's try to figure out a way to fit into that. Nope, they're not going to. And by the time they realize it, it's going to be too late, and they're going to start closing chains. It's unfortunate, but if you're not willing to change with the times, progress is progress, no matter what. And if you're not willing to accept that progress, you're going to be by yourself looking around, looking like Mr. Monopoly for the rest of your days when it's all said and done.
So that about wraps it up for us here at the Weekend Take. I want to thank Kevin Martin for coming on and being our co-host this week. Thank you for Kevin and all the great insight.
Thank you for having me. Hope to get on here at some time later on in the year and do this again.
Be sure to follow the Weekend Take. We're on Twitter at Weekend Take. We're also on Facebook, YouTube. You can also check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and a number of other platforms. One last time, Kevin, hit us up with some websites to check you out at.
So you can catch film production stuff, Kaleidosite Films, all one word.com. That's KALEIDOSIGHTFILMS.com. That's where my production company for music, 3143 artist management. But the website is 3143mgmt.com, all one word. And you can find those same things on Instagram, and you can find me on Instagram at codename_Leon, as well as on Twitter. So that way, when you go look for me, send your hate mail there.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for that. And so once again, I want to thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you all next week. Have a good day.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.